Welcome to Advocacy Talks, a podcast from the advocacy team at Vision Ireland. Here's what's coming up on this episode.
There is an onus on those of us who use Braille and who are lucky enough to use Braille and have access to Braille to support anyone who wants to learn it. Because it is a big undertaking, and there's lots of people who I'm sure are happy to help, but I think there's an onus on Braille users to make sure that people feel supported.
And now, here's Madeleine McNamara.
Hello everybody, and welcome to Advocacy Talks, which is the new and improved podcast from Vision Ireland. I'm Madeleine McNamara, and I work in advocacy for Vision Ireland, which is Ireland's national sight loss agency, which works to support people who are blind or vision impaired with our various range of services that we provide. I'm hoping that every month I'm going to be bringing you fascinating guests to help to learn about how people are working to improve the lives of people who are blind and vision impaired. And to get us started this month, we're going to talk everything Braille, because as you might not know, it's recently the 200th anniversary of the invention of Braille. So we thought it would be a really great idea to have a chat with somebody who's an expert in this area. And so I am delighted to introduce you to Stuart Lawler, who is the Executive Director and Chair of INBAF, which is the Irish National Braille and Alternative Formats Authority. So, Stuart, welcome to Advocacy Talks.
Thanks a million, Madeleine. That's a mouthful of an organisational name, I know, so you did very well to introduce all that.
Yes, I got the name of the organisation right, but I got your title wrong.
It's fine, okay. Nice to be here anyway.
Oh, you're very welcome. We're delighted to have you. So, as I was saying, it's the 200th anniversary of the invention of Braille, and I thought it would be great to just start off by telling our listeners a bit about Braille, because not everyone maybe knows what it is. I think it's, fairly well known, but, just in case, I thought it'd be good to just talk about what is Braille and who was Louis Braille?
It's interesting when you say that, because people see it, especially maybe people might have family members, people who are listening to this who might be visually impaired, might have family members who sort of see Braille in lifts or on your bottles of bleach and all these other things, but maybe don't really understand what it is. So Braille is a tactile reading system for people who are blind, and indeed some people who have low vision use Braille as well. And as you said in your intro, it's been around for 200 years. In 1825, Louis Braille unveiled his code for reading and writing in a school in Paris. I think he was 16 or thereabouts when that happened. And he based, very loosely based, I suppose, his Braille code on something that had been developed previously by a gentleman named Charles Barbier, called night writing. And night writing was sort of a bit more clunky, and it was based on raised print. And the idea of night writing was soldiers during the night, obviously they couldn't have their flashlights on if they wanted to read something or if they wanted to communicate with someone. They would use their hands when they were out in the trenches fighting, right? So that brings us night writing, and then night writing rather, and night writing brought us Braille. Of course, around this time, there was lots of other things being tested out. There's a fascinating kind of history of tactile writing systems being trialed and tested in various countries around the world. But the world settled on Braille, and it has been around ever since. And just like print, Braille has evolved and I suppose continues to do so. And it's a very exciting year, I think, for those of us who use Braille and for people who support people to use Braille.
Absolutely. I think that the thing I think about Braille is that it's such a, I know there are obviously different languages and all the rest of it, but it's such a standard format in the sense that you have 6 dots, and those raised dots in combination, form the letters and symbols that we use in Braille, whereas other systems where you're maybe trying to use raised writing, as in the print form of writing, it could be very variable. Depending on, everyone's handwriting is different, or every text sort of font is different, whereas Braille has that sort of standard, whatever language or whatever you're using, it's the 6 dots. And I think that, to me, is a strength.
Yeah, absolutely. And you've touched on something really interesting around the uniformity of the code, if you want to call it that. So, Braille within the English speaking world had several variants over the years. So, just one example that springs to mind is for a long time in this part of the world anyway, we didn't use capital letters. And I'm not really sure why that was the case. It wasn't long term a good idea, I think, because it meant that children who were learning Braille back in the day didn't really understand how to use capital letters or where they might be used. But in the States, they did. And there were other various code changes that were happening in different countries. People had their own rules for use of Braille, and it led to an inconsistent reading experience for people. Or if you were maybe getting a piece of Braille from another country, there might be a funny sign that you hadn't recognized. So in the mid-90s, they started a process to unify the English Braille code. And in the mid-2000s, that gave us the first version of what we now know as UEB, or Unified English Braille. And that means, Madeleine, that regardless where you go in the world, you'll pick up your Braille menu or your Braille book or whatever it is. If it's in this new unified code, it will be the very same, regardless of where it has been produced. And for people who are seasoned Braille readers already, there's very little new stuff to learn.
That's fantastic, because there's enough to learn in Braille as it is without having to learn different forms for the different parts of the world.
Absolutely, yeah.
You know, myself, I was a Braille user as a child. I still use Braille actually at times, but I do have some useful vision, so I don't have to use it all the time. But it is an amazing thing, I think, to have that skill to use Braille. And, you know, there's a lot to learn in it. You know, I don't think people kind of, maybe general public, understand that it's not like just learning the alphabet. You have to learn all sorts of what we would call contractions, so that a single symbol would represent either a word or a part of a word, which makes it much, you know, quicker to read, actually, because you're not having to read every letter. You're reading a shortened version. But you know, obviously, it is a lot to learn. So it is a fascinating thing. And what would you think about that? I mean, I know for people learning it, they can find that a challenge and a I don't know.
So maybe it's worth explaining that the reasoning behind those contractions which you mentioned are the shorthand, Braille shorthand. People call it shorthand, or we call it contractions. So there are two types of Braille. There's uncontracted, or sometimes we call it grade 1 Braille, and that is where every word is spelled out letter by letter. So every letter is used. So if you're writing the word and, you write out A-N-D. And then in contracted Braille, or grade 2 Braille, we use, as you said a moment ago, those contractions. So the word and is now a symbol. It's a combination of those 6 dots. And these symbols or contractions exist to try to make Braille a little more manageable. We always tell the story of back in school days, the pocket, I think it was called the Oxford Concise Pocket Dictionary, was something like 15 volumes, I think, in Braille. So it wasn't pocket-based.
It's very bulky. Yeah, it is bulky. And I know in school, carrying around, I have writing Braille in school, and, we'd have making notes in class, and then we'd have folders, and, these massive, children these days complaining about, the big heavy books in their bags, but we had these massive folders with the Braille we printed out, carrying around. They were very, very big. So yes, I can understand the contracted Braille. Trying to reduce that down makes complete sense, doesn't it?
Yeah, and you've given me memories there of people, as you said, carrying big bags of books, and then carrying a Perkins Brailler, which is the Braille typewriter. Some people may know about big, clunky things that you wouldn't want to get a smack of a Perkins Brailler if you were if you were standing in the way of a.
Well, I'm always amazed, and I think back to my school days as to how there weren't any. I don't remember particularly. I mean, occasionally you get the odd bash, but I don't remember any serious injuries. But it's amazing because, as you say, they're an incredibly heavy, solid piece of kit, aren't they, that you're carrying around?
Very much. Yeah.
So, I mean, I think now that with the kind of modern technology, that's kind of, I don't know how. Do do you find that the Perkins Braille is still used very much, or is it now all gone electronic?
So the Perkins Braille is definitely still used because there are some subjects and there are some things you need to do with Braille where you do still need to have the Perkins, and this probably does introduce us to or bring us onto some of the Braille technology elements as well. Braille technology up to now has traditionally been a single line of Braille. So the way these devices work, and we often call them Braille displays, is they display the text from your computer, or some of them can be standalone devices, and they put that text on a kind of a strip, and that strip is what we call refreshable Braille. So the dots pop up and down, the little pins pop up and down rather to make the dots, and these can come in various lengths. So the smallest I think that we've seen might be a 12 line display, right up to 12 cell display is the smallest. And if you have an 80 cell display, obviously it's really long, and that would be very, very, for people would use it maybe at their desk. You might have people who are programmers, or somebody who's maybe a writer or is doing a lot of proofreading might use an 80 cell Braille display. But up to very recently, they have been single line devices. So using those to do something like maths or Braille music, where you really need to often see more than one line of Braille at a time, is very challenging.
Yeah.
So the Perkins always has a place. Now we are seeing more multi-line devices coming out, but the multi-line Braille journey is very new. And I think we're all still, including the people who are manufacturing the multi-line devices, we're all still working out how it's going to be best used, and how multi-line Braille is going to interface with the already existing Braille tech out there and the screen reading software that drives it. So there's a whole lot of variables when you look at multi-line Braille. And to answer your question, the Perkins Brailler, I think, is going nowhere.
Oh, good.
Everyone has a Perkins, and it's funny, you talk to people who've used Braille for years, and they have a Perkins, and they might use it 5 or 6 times a year to write Christmas cards or birthday cards or to Braille labels. But people will never part with their Perkins devices,
Yes, I still have mine. So
there you go.
Absolutely, I'm attached to it, so I wouldn't want it to go. Just a technical question on the Braille. I haven't actually used a electronic Braille device myself, and if you're reading it, do you then if you're reading the line of text with your, because when you're reading Braille, for people that don't know, you obviously hands are on the Braille, and you use both hands. One hand kind of goes along and the other one's kind of following. If you were reading multiple lines, your left hand would kind of come back to read the second line, which obviously with the electronic it's not quite the same. But when you come to the end of the line, do you then indicate somehow that you've read that so that it can generate the next line?
Yeah, there's various ways that can happen. The most common is that you press a button when you get to the end of the line. So there's usually a button conveniently located at the end of the line, so your finger can just tap that button and the next line pops up.
Okay.
Now there are other ways to do it. There's something called auto scroll, which means that the display will change every 5 seconds, for example, and you set that based on your reading speed. And then there's a company in Germany called HelpTech, who I think this is really kind of innovative. They're the only ones who've done this, but they've created something called ATC, Active Tactile Control. And what this does is, when your fingers reach the end of the display, it triggers something and it automatically pops up the next line.
Oh, that's clever.
But they have that patented, so nobody else can do it at the moment.
I think I don't like the idea of it sort of doing it at a certain speed, because if you kind of get a bit distracted or tired or something.
Exactly. That's why most people don't like the auto scroll. Some people use it, but I would agree with you. If you momentarily lapse and the thing keeps scrolling, you're there, hang on, where have I gone to? So most people tend to scroll by just pressing a button when they are ready to read the next line.
Yeah, which is fantastic. And I think the thing for me with Braille is it just gives that extra level of independence, which isn't always have to be reliant on technology. And I'm thinking in particular for myself, I have children who are now grown, but the ability to read to them, to read a book or story at a time.
I think there are so many examples of, nowadays we have, digital menus, being able to download a menu to your device. Maybe I have a Braille display that's attached to my phone, so I can, read and write emails or look at my messages or whatever, in complete privacy without the voice. But it's even lovely, I think, Madeline, to go somewhere and be handed a piece of Braille. You go into a restaurant or you go somewhere and someone says, "Oh, we have a Braille menu," and it's still very exciting because it's so rare. And I think the other thing that's happening, and maybe that I find myself thinking about in the 200 years of Braille, so I have a 5.5-year-old son who's fully sighted, and the other week we got into a lift that had no Braille, and he drew my attention to it, saying there's no Braille. So he had to press the number we wanted.
Wow.
And he's making the point that, oh, you wouldn't be able to do this if you were on your own, which I wouldn't be,
Yeah.
So I think having sighted people and sighted kids, because they sort of soak everything up, having them watching those things and making those points is actually really powerful.
Absolutely. I mean, in another way, I know I do use it sometimes. It is on medicines. Having
Yeah.
the Braille to indicate that it's paracetamol or whatever else that you're picking up, I think is totally invaluable.
And I always say to people, because we all have had the incidents where you get your medicine from the pharmacy and they have invariably, because they don't know, they've stuck the little label over the Braille. So you try to very gently peel the label off, and of course some of the dots come with it, or the Braille gets damaged. So now I tend to say anyway in my pharmacy, do you mind not putting the label on? And once you explain to them, they say, oh yeah, of course, it's going to cover the Braille that you need to read. So it's really important if people feel comfortable to have those conversations with their pharmacists, because the more of us who say it, the more they will understand.
Absolutely. And it is always about raising awareness. I had done the same in my own pharmacy as well. Raise that with them that, please don't put the label on the Braille. And it is hard for them to remember, but
Yeah,
we
of
keep
course.
on reminding people, and hopefully as time goes on, people do learn and, help to improve that. So yeah, no, I think it is an amazing thing for Braille. And do you find, I learned as a child, I think I was about 5 when I started to learn Braille. And I know a lot of people who lose their sight when they're older can sometimes feel a bit nervous about learning Braille, that they won't be able to. And do you have any kind of thoughts on that, Stuart?
Yeah, so I suppose there's a few things I'd say, and the first one is that people, when as you said, they lose their sight later in life, they're really wondering whether it's worth the effort. And lots of people might think, well, there's so much technology now. Do I really need to anymore? I think when you're an adult learner, it's a bit different. When you're kids, you can be, very prescriptive. You have to do this. It's in school, part of your curriculum. When you're an adult, you have to find a hook. You have to find something that makes Braille useful to you. And, I've worked with people in the past, and I always use this example because it was really, the person I was talking to who was losing her vision quickly didn't want to learn Braille, but in the course of the conversation came up that what she was missing most was cooking, and she wasn't, didn't have any labels on her spices.
Yeah.
And then as we were having a conversation with another colleague at the time, all realizing, hang on, Braille will be ideal for you. Even if you just learn grade 1 uncontracted Braille, you can label your spices.
Yeah.
And that's all it took to get her connected to sort of, oh, now I know I can learn this Braille because I have a goal.
Yeah.
And she went much further than grade 1, but that's all she needed to start. And the other thing I say to people is people get and we say this to teachers as well. In the past, I've worked with a lot of sighted teachers who are learning Braille to work with students, and they think they have to do hours and hours every day. Or you'll find people who will say, oh my God, I didn't do anything all week. I spent 3 hours on Saturday and I was exhausted. I couldn't focus.
Yeah.
10, 15, max 20 minutes a day of Braille.
As you say, it's the way with lots of things we learn, little and often. It's
Small
often,
chunks, little and
yeah,
often.
much more beneficial than trying to do a big long session of it, which is just too exhausting. Well, I think that's fascinating because, as you say, it is just finding the purpose for people to find Braille useful. And it really can be. It really can be a very an addition. And I don't think people should think that it has to be Braille, or you can use all sorts of other things too. We have so many different technologies available to us these days, but it is just so nice to have, I think, that real independence that Braille gives you, I think, in a different way.
Yeah, and you're right about Braille and technology can complement each other. They can coexist happily. And just the other point I've been kind of making again over the last month or so, again, we're talking a lot about the Braille, and it's celebrating its 200th year, is that there is an onus on those of us who use Braille and who are lucky enough to use Braille and have access to Braille to support anyone who wants to learn it, because it is a big undertaking. And there's lots of people who I'm sure are happy to help, but I think there's an onus on Braille users to make sure that people feel supported.
Absolutely. No, that's so important. I totally agree. Well, you mentioned at the beginning that you were can I get your title right now this time, Stuart? What was it? Executive Director and Chair of INBAF. So you maybe tell us a little bit about that organisation and what you do.
Yeah, INBAF. So I stress, because it sounds a very grand title, it is a voluntary position. INBAF is a small organisation. So INBAF is the Irish National Braille and Alternative Formats Authority, as you said in your intro. We were founded in 2011 by the main Braille producers in Ireland. So that's the Media Centre at Vision Ireland, Child Vision's Braille Production Service, which is now called Reading Services, and the Arbor Hill Prison Braille Production Unit. And these Braille producers came together to have a single voice in advocating for and supporting Braille and other alternative formats as they relate to people with sight loss in Ireland. Now, INBAF is also a member of the International Council on English Braille, that's ICEB, and that organisation is the custodian, I suppose, of the Unified English Braille Code, but also supports, maintains and advocates for other codes within Braille. So, for example, maths and music and science, and also gets involved on the periphery of other Braille languages. So within ICEB, there are 9 members at the moment, so countries right across the world like Australia, New Zealand, the UK, US, Ireland, Nepal, South Africa. And we meet once a month and are involved in lots of activities around maintaining and supporting Braille throughout the countries for which we have jurisdiction. Within INBAF here in Ireland, we're doing a lot of work at the moment around just redefining our own vision and values. I've taken over as chair since last July. You're going to see a lot of things in this year from INBAF around Braille 200. We're going to have a couple of face-to-face community events. So watch on our social media and our website and the websites of our founding members, I'm sure, for information on that over time. And we're going to launch later in the year an updated Irish primer that gives all the latest changes to the Irish Braille Code, which is a piece of work that INBAF have been involved in for the last 8 or 10 years, redefining the Irish Braille Code that's used in schools. So there's lots of things going on.
Is that the Irish for the Irish language, or for?
Yes, for the Irish language. Yeah.
I see.
Yeah.
Interesting.
So we redefined. We put together a subcommittee who were particularly interested in the area of Irish Braille, and we have an update to that publication, which we will launch later in the year.
Fantastic. Okay. So you were mentioning about events, and I think when we were talking prior to this podcast, you mentioned a particular event coming up. I don't know whether that was one of the ones you've just mentioned, or was there something else that you were wanting to advertise? I can't remember.
Yeah. So no, we are looking at a couple of what we would call community events during the year. We don't have dates for those yet. We are also going to be launching an INBAF podcast, and the website, which is at www.inbaf, is currently being updated. So that's inbaf.ie is currently being updated. So it's a bit of a hub for finding information. That we've lots of frequently asked questions up there about the Unified English Braille Code, and there's also information there on the updated Irish Braille Code that I just mentioned.
Fantastic. Well, it's great to hear all that amazing work that you're doing, and that Braille is still so supported and available for people in its various formats now, as you say, whether it be using your Perkins Braille. My memories of that actually are very much doing exam time in school, and can you imagine however many children in an exam hall all bashing out on their Perkins Braille like a thunderous noise.
Yeah, I've
silence.
seen all those, and I don't know. You kind of wonder now. You say, "Gosh, how did we all get through exams with all that noise?" But somehow you kind of switched off some of that noise, didn't you, in your head? I think.
I think you did. I mean, I think it was just so much of it. It was like white noise in some ways,
Yeah.
So there was no such thing as a quiet exam in my day, anyway. But we managed, And one thing I would say about Braille, if you're using contracted Braille, particularly, it's amazingly fast to write, because you've got all these contractions and you're thundering along. You can write. You could do it faster than any typist. I would imagine. It could be interesting as a fun experiment to have put a fast typist against a Brailler and see who won in terms of getting out there.
With contractions, as you say. I think it's also important to say, Madeleine, that to people who might be listening to this who are thinking of exploring Braille and learning it, I think it's well worth giving it a try and get from it what you want.
Absolutely.
No one expects everyone to be expert at all the contractions. Sometimes I hear people talking about, Braille reading speed, and somebody saying, "Oh my God, this person's such a fast reader. I'll never be that fast." And I hate seeing that, because I hate Braille becoming that kind of that it becomes maybe somewhat divisive for people. So use Braille to make Braille work for you.
Absolutely.
And if you can find a way to do that, then that's great.
Oh, 100%. I mean, as you say, whether it's, just the uncontracted Braille, which will help you to read the medicine packet, which will help you in all sorts of ways, or as you say, the lady you were talking about earlier with the Braille on her spices. It's whatever way it works for you and what helps you. And in talking about reading speeds, I mean, even people who are reading print have vastly different ability to read fast or not, don't they? I know some people can skim read and plow through a book very quick, and other people it takes them longer, and that's just normal. It's just we're all different, and there shouldn't be a reason to. I was joking about the competing about the writing, but it's not a competition. It's what works for you.
And I think everybody has their silent reading voice, maybe. And when we have to read out loud, I think whether you're reading print or Braille, you do become a bit more self-conscious.
Oh, 100%. I used to read out loud to my children all the time, and it was fine because you get into a rhythm of it. But if I try to read something out loud to strangers, it's awful. I can hardly read it at all. So it's very different, absolutely. And I just think the ability to read, to access whatever we're trying to read in any format is amazing. It's Louis Braille really did enhance and advance, I suppose, the lives of people who are blind and vision impaired, in order to enable them to access the world in ways that they couldn't in the past. So I do think we owe him an immense debt of gratitude, for introducing Braille. And as you say, he was only 16. Incredible, really, that someone so young should have had that ability to come up with this amazing code that would open so many doors for people.
And I think he was probably in his day. Nowadays we see all the people who are, going out and doing things. People with disabilities who are going and trailblazing. He was considered at the time by some, I think, who is this upstart? How would a blind person know what is best for blind people? Because society was very different in those days. So he challenged all these stereotypes back then. And, somebody who was blind creating a reading system to be used by people who are blind. I mean, it's a great story.
It's a fantastic story. Well, Stuart, thank you so much for your time today. I really do appreciate you coming on and talking to me about everything Braille. And just to let people know that if you need anything more support or help from Vision Ireland, you can always log on to our website, which is www.vi.ie, or you can call our info line on 1800 911 250. Keep well, everyone, and I look forward to bringing you another interesting guest next month. Take care. Bye-bye.
Thanks for listening to Advocacy Talks. To get in touch with our advocacy team, send us an email to campaigns@vi.ie, or why not join one of our local advocacy networks, where you can work together with others to solve some of the biggest problems facing blind and partially sighted people in Ireland. Thanks for listening, and see you next time.